Hey everyone! Welcome back to Anime Dreams, where we dive into fascinating fanfic ideas and alternate anime scenarios. Today, we have an exciting topic for you. What if Naruko became the ultimate vigilante? Before we jump in, a quick disclaimer: this channel is dedicated to entertainment and discussion. I do not own any of the anime footage used. Full credit goes to their rightful creators and copyright holders. Now, let's get started. From the moment Naruko first heard of the legendary deeds of the fourth Hokage, she knew she was destined to surpass them. It wasn't just a childhood fantasy or a fleeting wish for recognition. It was a certainty that ran through every fiber of her being. Naruko believed without a doubt that she would rise above the fourth and become the greatest ninja the world had ever known. Of course, her journey didn't start off easy. She was a scrappy child, often misunderstood and left to fend for herself. For reasons she didn't fully understand, the villagers kept their distance, offering little more than cold stares and quiet whispers. No one volunteered to guide her, and she spent much of her early life struggling against the silent rejection that surrounded her. From the beginning, the odds were stacked against Naruko. She had no clan to back her, no family to support her, no friends to rely on. But what she did have was sheer determination. A will of iron that refused to break, the kind of relentless drive that set apart those who never gave up. Life knocked her down countless times, but she always got back up, ready to push forward. She failed the ninja exam twice before finally passing, but even in failure, she never let herself wallow. Each setback only pushed her harder. She spent long nights at the training grounds, hurling kunai at targets and stubbornly attempting, and failing, to master the clone jutsu, her greatest obstacle at the time. By the time she turned 13, Naruko had made a name for herself among the most promising young ninja of her generation. She had stood against an A-ranked opponent, defended the village from Gaara, and even learned the Rasengan, a technique pioneered by the fourth Hokage. When she set out on her journey with Jiraiya, the Toad Sage, she was on the fast track to achieving her dream. More than earning Sakura's respect, more than bringing Sasuke back, and even more than claiming the title of Hokage, her greatest ambition was within reach. She could almost taste it. Then came the training trip. When she finally returned to the village after 3 years, Naruko was brimming with confidence, certain that she had become one of the strongest ninja alive. She even believed she could take on Orochimaru himself if necessary. But reality had other plans. While she had been training, so had her enemies. And upon her return, she found herself facing foes more formidable than ever before. The Akatsuki had set their sights on her, determined to capture the powerful entity sealed within her. For nearly a year, they pursued her relentlessly. Each battle became more intense, each training session more grueling. By the time she stood against Pain, the Akatsuki's leader, she had mastered Sage Mode, following in the footsteps of her mentor. She emerged victorious, saving the village and earning the admiration of everyone around her. At that moment, Naruko felt content. If she hadn't surpassed the fourth Hokage, then at the very least, she had reached his level. But fate had yet another challenge in store for her. With the onset of the Fourth Great Ninja War, everything Naruko had worked for was put to the test. At first, she was kept away from the front lines, training to fully harness the power of the Nine Tails. She had become stronger than ever before, reaching heights she had once only dreamed of. She had achieved her goal, she had surpassed the fourth Hokage. But even then, she was not the strongest. That title, it seemed, belonged to a masked man who called himself Tobi. Tobi, the one who commanded an army of reanimated warriors. Tobi, who wielded spacetime jutsu and possessed a knowledge of techniques far beyond Naruko's understanding. Tobi, who threatened not only her but also everyone she cared about. This was it. Naruko had surpassed the fourth Hokage. She had even been told so by the man himself when they met within the seal. Now, only one thing remained: to defeat Tobi. Only then would there be no question that she was the strongest ninja alive. When she finally fought her way through the seemingly endless waves of enemies, she came face to face with Tobi in the battle of a lifetime. The result was a crushing defeat. Tobi countered every move in her arsenal as if he had anticipated them all. Even when she unleashed the full power of the Nine Tails, he remained unfazed. His movements were untouchable, as slippery as mist, and his attacks struck with overwhelming force. In the end, when all seemed lost, Naruko was only saved by the intervention of the cage, along with Guy and Rock Lee. It was a bitter reality to accept. Raw strength alone would not be enough to win. Determined to never suffer such a defeat again, Naruko pushed herself harder than ever. She trained relentlessly, refining her taijutsu under Guy and Rock Lee, even adopting their extreme weight training methods. She honed her strategy and tactics under Kakashi, learning to see beyond the obvious. She pestered Shikamaru until he agreed to teach her how to set up intricate traps within traps, a skill he executed effortlessly in battle. And she sparred with the cage in intense, no-holds-barred fights, determined to gain as much experience as possible before facing Tobi again. Meanwhile, Tobi was far from idle. Although the reanimated warriors had been sealed away and Kabuto, one of his key allies, had been eliminated, he still commanded an army of Zetsu clones. He waged a relentless campaign of hit-and-run raids on villages and cities, forcing Naruko and her allies to remain on constant alert. His goal was clear, to draw her out. But this time, Naruko would be ready. And so, the long-awaited day arrived. A full year after their initial encounter, Naruko was finally granted permission to personally confront Tobi during one of his raids. The Kiges had determined that she was ready. Her training had been intense, pushing her to the limits of her abilities, and she had reached the pinnacle of her strength. The battle that followed was nothing short of earth-shaking. It was unlike anything the observing shinobi had ever witnessed. Naruko, armed with her sage training and strengthened by her bond with the Nine Tails, faced off against the overwhelming power of the Rinnegan and Sharingan. The clash lasted 12 grueling hours, with Naruko employing every new technique, every strategy, and every ounce of her strength to defeat Tobi. Meanwhile, Tobi utilized his mastery of space-time techniques to evade her attacks while countering with formidable dojutsu abilities. In the end, the battle had been razor close, but Naruko's resilience, stamina, and sheer determination triumphed. Tobi, exhausted and increasingly careless, failed to evade her final attack, a devastating Odama Rasengan. And so, Naruko stood victorious over her fallen adversary, a deep sense of accomplishment washing over her. She had done it. She had protected her village, her world, and proved herself as one of the greatest shinobi to ever live. A single thought crossed her mind at that moment: I really did it. However, Tobi was not finished just yet. He had one last message to deliver. As he removed his mask, Naruko's eyes widened. She recognized the face beneath, one she had seen before in an old photograph Kakashi had shown her. It was a face from the past, a ghost of another time. Uchiha Obito was alive, though not for much longer. With labored breaths, he spoke. "You've done well, Naruko. I never imagined my journey would end at the hands of a child. And the daughter of my former sensei, no less." A weak chuckle escaped him, followed by a cough. "I have resented this world for so long," he admitted. "It stole everything from me, my dreams, my happiness. I had a plan. We had a plan. We would cast the image of the Sharingan on the moon, create the ultimate illusion, and craft a world of peace. No war, no suffering, just a reality where everyone could be with their loved ones again. I could have been with Rin and Kakashi. You could have been with your mother and father. A world of endless happiness. A world built on deception." Naruko countered, sitting on a nearby pile of rubble, catching her breath after the exhausting battle. "What does it matter if that deception brings joy to those we love?" Obito asked. His voice was weakening, the last of his energy slipping away. "I was offering a world without pain, a world where no child would be left to suffer, where no one would be forced into terrible choices. A world where I wouldn't have had to watch the person I cared about most be lost forever." His voice trailed off, a shadow of sorrow crossing his face. "But hardship is part of life," Naruko argued. "My parents sacrificed themselves, and I had to endure so much because of the Nine Tails. The village misunderstood me for years, but I never let that stop me. I worked hard and found my own happiness. And what about those who never had the opportunities you did? Obito asked, his breaths growing shallower. The adrenaline that had kept him going was fading fast. There are children who were never given a chance. They didn't have the strength to change their fate, and the world certainly didn't help them. I wanted to create a place where everyone had a chance, where no one would lose the people they loved. That was my dream. His voice grew faint as exhaustion overtook him. And to the one who shattered that dream. He took one final breath, his gaze locking onto Naruko's. I leave only. Silence. His words faded into the wind, and with them, the final remnants of his strength. Naruko watched, her mind filled with the weight of everything that had transpired. The battle was over, but its impact would remain with her forever. Naruko sprang to her feet the moment the final words left her lips, but she was already too late. Lowering her guard to give her opponent a last moment of dignity had been a costly mistake. Exhausted from the battle, her reflexes were sluggish, and now her kindness was about to put her in danger. Kamui. With his last breath and the last remnants of his strength, Toby activated his final technique. As his vision faded, he caught a glimpse of Naruko's face, frozen in sheer disbelief. In that fleeting moment, he felt a sense of satisfaction. Naruko found herself suspended in an endless void. The instability of Toby's hastily executed jutsu had left it incomplete and unpredictable. Kakashi had once explained that when he and Toby used their shared ability, the target would be sent into a pocket dimension, one they could never leave unless Toby himself willed it. However, this didn't resemble any pocket dimension she had ever imagined. Instead, it was an infinite abyss of darkness, stretching beyond sight in every direction, leaving her completely adrift. Frustration welled up within her. She should have ended the battle decisively. She shouldn't have hesitated, shouldn't have dropped her guard. But this was who she was, someone who always tried to see the best in people, even when it wasn't in her favor. Her compassion had brought her here, trapped in a seemingly inescapable void. The thought of never seeing her friends again, never fulfilling her dreams, weighed heavily on her. She had become one of the strongest shinobi in history, but what was the point if she was stuck here forever? These thoughts consumed her until exhaustion finally took hold, and she drifted into sleep. Her dreams carried her back to Konoha, where a grand festival was underway. Her friends were all there, cheering her name. There was an endless supply of ramen, and for a moment, she felt pure joy. Even the odd sight of Rock Lee in a dress and Ino's head somehow appearing on Shikamaru's body couldn't dampen her excitement. However, the dream was cut short by a rather rude awakening. As her eyes fluttered open, Naruko groggily took in her surroundings. This wasn't the void she had fallen asleep in. Instead, she was in a narrow, unkempt alleyway flanked by towering brick buildings. Relief flooded through her, Toby's final act of revenge had failed. Never mind the fact that she didn't recognize the style of the buildings or that the air was thick with unfamiliar smells and sounds. The important thing was that she was no longer trapped. She could find a way home. Without hesitation, Naruko dashed out of the alley, her tattered orange and black jacket flaring behind her, the zipper long lost in battle. As she reached the street, she took a deep breath, only to immediately regret it. The air was dense and far from fresh, but that was the least of her concerns. She opened her eyes, ready to take in her surroundings, and was met with an astonishing sight. This place was unlike anything she had ever seen before, certainly nothing within the elemental nations. She had traveled across the continent during her training, yet nothing compared to this. Skyscrapers loomed overhead, far taller than anything back home. Strange metallic contraptions sped along the dark roads, moving faster than any cart or carriage she had ever encountered. The people around her wore unfamiliar clothing, and as they turned to stare at her, speaking in a language she didn't recognize, realization sank in. Her heart grew heavy as she let out a deep sigh. She was far from home, perhaps farther than she could have ever imagined. And finding her way back wouldn't be as simple as asking for directions. Lost and alone in an unfamiliar place, surrounded by people speaking a language she couldn't understand, Naruko knew her first priority was to get her bearings. She glanced up at the towering buildings around her, but no matter how far she craned her neck, their tops remained out of sight. To get a proper view of her surroundings, she needed to reach higher ground and scan the horizon for any recognizable landmarks. Taking a quick running start, Naruko launched herself into the air with a powerful leap, drawing astonished gasps from the people nearby. She landed several stories up on the glass facade of the nearest building, effortlessly clearing the road below, along with the strange moving vehicles that filled it. The onlookers were visibly stunned. While they had witnessed extraordinary feats before, such displays of agility and strength were always remarkable. Naruko took barely a moment to scan the bustling street below, observing how the road stretched endlessly in both directions. She needed a better vantage point. Determined, she sprang into motion, vanishing from sight in an instant as she made her way toward the top of the towering building. Meanwhile, Clark Kent, better known as Superman, sat at his desk in the Daily Planet headquarters, finishing up an article assigned by his editor. It was a light-hearted piece about a panda at the zoo being introduced to a potential mate, hardly riveting, but necessary to maintain his cover as a mild-mannered journalist from Kansas. His mind was elsewhere, counting down the minutes until he could leave and begin his nightly patrol as Superman. Just as he glanced up from his work, a blur of black and orange zipped past one of the large windows overlooking the city. An ordinary person might have mistaken it for someone falling, but Clark was far from ordinary. With his enhanced Kryptonian vision, he could see what no human, aside from perhaps the Flash, could perceive. Someone was sprinting up the side of the building. It was a rare sight, and he could count on one hand the number of people capable of such a feat. None of them, however, wore black and orange. Realizing this was something worth investigating, Clark set aside his work. This had certainly captured his attention. In a matter of seconds, Naruko reached the top of the towering structure. Without the training weight she had been accustomed to wearing during sessions with Guy and Lee, moving at such speeds was almost effortless. Upon reaching the summit, however, she was momentarily halted by an unexpected sight. A massive golden sphere crowned the building, far larger than its base and nearly half the size of the Hokage Tower. Her initial reaction was a mixture of awe and curiosity. Without hesitation, she adhered her feet to the structure's underside and scaled her way to the very top. From this vantage point, she could see the full expanse of the metropolis she had arrived in. It was, without question, the largest city she had ever laid eyes on. The sheer scale of it was beyond belief. There was simply no way a place of this magnitude had remained hidden from the rest of the elemental nations. She had heard stories of sailors venturing into uncharted waters, but not one tale had ever mentioned a civilization like this. It was too vast, too grand, impossible to overlook. As she stood there, taking in the breathtaking skyline, her thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a voice from behind. "And who might you be?" She spun around in surprise, coming face to face with an unexpected sight. A man hovered in the air, his appearance unlike anything she had encountered before. His attire was striking. He wore a skin-tight blue suit, red boots, and, oddly enough, red underwear over his suit. A bold red S emblem, encased in a yellow diamond, was displayed across his chest. And, as if that weren't unusual enough, he wore a flowing red cape. Unless this man was some kind of eccentric ruler, an idea she highly doubted, there was no logical reason for such a costume. Her astonishment left her momentarily speechless, unable to form a response. Superman, on the other hand, took a moment to assess the situation. When he had reached the top of the Daily Planet, he had expected to find an unusual sight, but this was beyond what he had anticipated. Before him stood a young girl, appearing no older than a teenager, clad in worn and tattered clothing. She looked like she had been through a battle, though there were no visible injuries on her. While Superman had encountered many strange things in his lifetime, this was certainly a new experience. Wanting to establish communication, he greeted her, but instead of an immediate reply, she stared at him with wide-eyed disbelief. It was an expression he had seen countless times, often on criminals just before he apprehended them. However, this girl's reaction was different. There was no fear, no guilt, just sheer bewilderment. Since she hadn't responded, Superman took the opportunity to observe her more closely. She was remarkably fit, her physique well-toned, similar to the young heroes he had encountered before. If she were a sidekick, he would have recognized her, but her attire didn't match any known heroes. Her torn black and orange jacket had seen better days, with missing zippers and frayed edges. Matching orange pants, fastened with a belt, featured a holster strapped to her right leg, though a quick scan with his X-ray vision confirmed it was empty. She wore unusual open-toed footwear that, at first glance, resembled modified boots with the front sections removed. Finally, he took in her facial features: bright blue eyes, golden blonde hair, a tanned complexion, and 3 distinctive whisker-like marks on each cheek. She was unlike anyone he had encountered before. Deciding to try again, he addressed her once more. "Hello? Who are you? What are you doing up here?" She responded quickly, but the words were unfamiliar to him: Japanese, if he wasn't mistaken. Unfortunately, Superman was no linguist. Unlike Batman, who seemed to have mastered every language and dialect known to humanity, his own knowledge of Japanese was limited to a few basic phrases, certainly not enough for a meaningful conversation. Recognizing the need for assistance, he tapped his earpiece and spoke into it. "Batman, come in." The man standing before Naruko spoke once more in an unfamiliar language, one that seemed common in this land. Taking a moment to gather her thoughts, she responded with the most articulate reply she could muster. "Speak in a language I can understand, you big red and blue guy." The man didn't seem to comprehend her words. Instead, he placed a hand to his ear and began speaking as if addressing someone unseen. Taking advantage of his distraction, Naruko decided it was time to move. She had already gathered enough information from observing the city from the rooftop. Now, she needed to find someone who spoke a language she understood and locate any references to the elemental nations. As she turned to leave, the man suddenly called out and placed a firm grip on her shoulder. Instinct kicked in before either of them could react. Naruko twisted around, knocked his hand away, and swiftly delivered a series of lightning-fast punches to his face. The man staggered slightly from the surprise, but otherwise, he barely seemed affected. Naruko settled into a defensive stance, resisting the urge to shake her hands. She hadn't infused chakra into the blows, but she had put enough strength behind them to feel the impact. Strangely, his face felt as solid as steel. For a moment, the two stood in a silent standoff. Then, the large blue-suited man raised his hands in the universal gesture of peace. Naruko hesitated before lowering her fists, remaining cautious in case he attempted anything unexpected. If he could withstand her punches so effortlessly, she wasn't eager to find out what he could do in retaliation. The man slowly lowered himself into a cross-legged sitting position and gestured for Naruko to do the same. She hesitated but eventually mirrored his actions, staying alert. He motioned for her to wait, and though she wasn't sure why, there was something about his demeanor that felt genuine. If things took a turn, she was confident in her ability to defend herself and make a quick escape. After all, she hadn't become one of the strongest ninja in the world without knowing how to handle situations like this. Meanwhile, Batman was en route to Metropolis, guided by a spell cast by Giovanni Zatara. Superman had reached out, requesting assistance with an unidentified individual, someone who had appeared atop the Daily Planet building and seemed to speak only Japanese. Recognizing the language barrier, Batman had wisely enlisted Zatara's help. The magician possessed the ability to temporarily grant knowledge of a language through magic, which would make communication much easier. Upon arrival, they found Superman sitting across from the mysterious individual, seemingly locked in an intense staring contest. However, the moment the young girl caught sight of Batman and Zatara, she immediately reacted. "Does everyone in this place know how to fly or what?" Batman decided to respond. "Not everyone, just a select few." The girl's face lit up as she realized someone finally understood her. Finally. Someone who isn't speaking nonsense. She sounded relieved, which Batman took as a positive sign. There were certainly worse moods to be in when being questioned. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping things simple. "Uzumaki Naruko. The greatest ninja to ever live," she declared with enthusiasm. Batman chose to set aside the ninja claim for now and continued, "How did you get up here?" "I ran up the side of the building." "Obviously." That response gave Batman pause. Superman hadn't mentioned anything about her running up the building, and the way she said it, it was as if it were the most normal thing in the world. We'll come back to that. First, this man here is going to help you understand our language, Batman explained, gesturing towards Zatara. It would be much easier to communicate if they were all speaking the same language. Zatara began chanting in his signature backwards speech, and Naruko, sensing something strange, started to protest. She had barely gotten to her feet when a wave of dizziness overcame her, forcing her to sit back down. For a brief moment, it felt as though a vast amount of knowledge had been placed directly into her mind. Then, just as suddenly, the sensation faded, and she realized she could now understand what these people were saying with perfect clarity. She glanced at the magician in the top hat and long coat with a raised eyebrow. That was quite the skill, being able to transfer knowledge into someone's mind like that. However, before she could dwell on it, the man in the dark outfit with the cape spoke again. "I take it you can understand me now?" Batman asked. Naruko nodded, and he continued, "Good. Now, you have some explaining to do. Let's start with what you said, about running up the side of the building." Naruko spoke slowly at first but quickly gained confidence. While she now understood the language, she still wasn't used to speaking it. "What about it?" "I ran up the side. It's pretty simple." She didn't see why this was such a big deal, it was one of the most basic ninja techniques. Batman frowned, about to press further, but Superman stepped in. "People don't usually run up buildings. It's clear that you have some special abilities, and we'd like to understand them. Oh, and I'm Superman, by the way." His tone was calm and sincere, though it made Naruko feel slightly uneasy. You can't just ask a ninja about their skills, even the simple ones. "What's your angle here?" she asked suspiciously. She had been taught from a young age that discussing her abilities too openly could be dangerous, and she wasn't about to break that rule now. "In fact, I've got some questions of my own," she continued. "Where am I? What language are we even speaking? And why is everyone dressed so weirdly?" Superman let out a small sigh. This was going to take some time. "Hello, everyone. I hope this experience was unique and exciting for you all. Thank you for your support. Stay tuned for more Anime Dreams.